Great, and we're live. So welcome everybody to this remote interview. My name is Lisette, and I'm interviewing people and companies doing great things remotely. And today on the line, I have Tim Burgess. I think I pronounced that. I didn't ask how to pronounce it. Is it Burgess?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And Tim, you're the director at Shield GEO Services Limited. You're in Sydney, Australia. So it is 9 o'clock at night for you now. It's 1 p.m. in the afternoon for me here in the Netherlands. And Shield GEO, it says on your website, you employ hundreds of remote international workers in over 60 countries for a number of different companies, some very famous ones. Shopify is amongst the list. And we're going to talk about that, but I want to ask first, what does your virtual office look like? What do you need to get your work done?
So interestingly, I often work actually out of an office, but in the company we're 80% remote. So that means we're set up for remote. For me to work, I just need a laptop, and that's it. I like to have second screen. I like to have a keyboard and a mouse and so on, and work from a desk. But literally everything is through the web. But on a day-to-day basis, I work with a group of 4 to 6 people in a WeWork space in Sydney, and then we're interacting with 25 odd colleagues who are dotted in 7 or 8 other countries around the world.
Okay, wow. And so why this WeWork space?
To be honest, it's because I personally really struggle with productivity when I work from home. So I found that working from home, I get distracted. I'm not as focused. I like having the cues of having other people working around me. And so I started working in a co-working space maybe 6 years ago when my second daughter was born. And I really loved it. And also because I live in the suburbs of Sydney, where there's not a lot of stuff to do. You know, you can't go out. I can't go out for coffee or lunch during the middle of the day. I can't go to the gym where I live. So it's better to actually go into the city where all that stuff is.
Oh, smart. So you started working in a co-working space, and then as you got more employees, you got an office, or were you guys all a company already when you started?
It started off just me, and then the first couple of people we hired were co-located, except for the other founder. So Duncan was always traveling around. So in a sense, we were always distributed in that he and I were in different countries. But then we built a little team around me, and that was like the initial core. And then everyone else subsequently we hired has been remote. I think with 1 or 2 exceptions.
And how many people are in the company now?
I think we just got to like 31, 32.
Okay, so 31, 32 people. Okay, great. And all over the world. So
yeah. I think we were counting the other day. I think it's like 9 countries now.
Dang. Okay, so we're going to talk about that. And being in Australia, I know that you suffer from time zone issues, also from previous conversations. So I want to definitely talk about time zones. But first, tell us a little bit about Shield GEO Services. Also a very interesting company, actually, as I started diving in. But why don't you go ahead and describe what you do?
Sure. So we're what they call an employer of record service. So companies use us to employ and payroll their international workers where they are unable or unwilling to do it themselves directly. So most commonly, it's easiest if I explain it in a situation. So a common scenario we'll have is an American company who want to start selling their product in Asia. And they'll hire, they want to start selling stuff in Japan, they'll hire a Japanese person to be their local sales rep. And then they'll say, well, we don't want to incorporate a new company in Japan just for this one person. And so they can use us, and we employ and payroll them. So we bring them onto our books. We handle all of the compliance and administration. So effectively, they get an employee who's treated as a local employee should be treated. They don't have to deal with any of the paperwork associated with that.
So that must mean that you guys know the immigration and job laws in many, many different countries.
Well, what I like to say that we know how to ask the questions. because it's so complicated. You know, if you think about employment, tax, payroll, and immigration, we don't do a lot of immigration, but you throw those things together in like 60 countries, that's a lot of regulations that change often like every year or every election. So our strength, I think, is that we know what questions to ask and we know how to sort of dig in and find that information. As opposed to like, we don't carry all the answers around in our,
Yeah, I
heads.
can't even imagine. Like, you'd have to be a computer to do that, right?
Well, that's one of the things we joke about internally is how much useless, like really weird information we're carrying around. Like I know a whole lot about how to calculate pro rata payroll in a whole lot of different countries. It doesn't help. It doesn't help me much in my day-to-day existence. But every now and then it's handy at work.
Yeah. I mean, I know every Depeche Mode lyric ever written, but I can't remember. Yeah, very basic stuff. So it's strange what we carry around in our head.
Yeah, I'm hoping at some stage it starts to leak out, but you never know. Maybe at like 85, I'll still be able to go, oh no, in Italy it's 30 days, but then you count Saturdays, but not the anyway.
So in this kind of service, so I can imagine that as remote working gets more and more common, that your kind of service must be either getting a lot more popular or a lot less popular as people are working from anywhere. Which one? I'm assuming it's getting more popular because people are going more places.
So it's interesting, actually. When we set the business up, we thought a lot of what we were going to deal with was international assignments and global mobility. So people moving from one place to the other. And it really surprised us that the market hasn't been that. I think it's less now than 20% of what we do. 80% of what we do is companies hiring local people. And so I think when you think about like technology and how much easier it is to communicate and have secure work environments through the browser, and you think about how much smaller the world has become in terms of how people relate and interact, I think the fear factor or the limitations stopping companies from hiring local people has dramatically decreased.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So actually, I think there's like the market is, I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, remote work it hasn't even scratched the surface in terms of where it's going to get to. I think in terms of companies employing internationally in particular, I think we're not even at the beginning in terms of where that's going to go.
Well, you think it's going to be like we're just starting the wave of people employing people internationally?
I think so. The single biggest thing, our single biggest problem in our business is awareness. Companies just don't know that the service exists. And I think the single biggest thing holding companies, well, there's two things I think that hold companies back from going remote. One is that it just freaks them out. Oh, how do I know what people are doing? How am I going to communicate with them? These things that once you start, you think it's just so trivial. But at the beginning, they seem like really big barriers. And then the other aspect is the logistics of it. And so, there's a bunch of solutions. We're one of them. But I think as awareness in that grows, that more and more companies will get into it, particularly in areas where it's tough to find talent, tough to find good people.
Right, which is sort of any major city. Like, yes, there's a lot of people there, and yes, there are also there's more work. There's always more work. So, yeah. And then also, I think there's a lot of people who don't want to live in that kind of city environment to be so packed in. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think also, there's that saying that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. I think it's a little bit of a simplification, but the fact is that there are huge pools of talent outside of the place where people most commonly look. outside of the US, outside of the Bay Area, outside of Europe even. And there are people there who are desperate to get a good chance, are desperate to show what they can do and work in a good environment. So I think more and more companies will take advantage of that.
Yeah, I love it. So you're saying, so once people get over the being scared of going remote, once companies get over the like, oh my God, I don't know if we can do it. How do we know? And are they going to just be lazy? Then the fear becomes the logistics. So now over time, I guess is maybe if to summarize what you're saying, over time, people are getting less and less scared of going remote because it's becoming more common, it's becoming more necessary. And now people are also moving now towards, okay, how do we do the logistics? Like, okay, we know we need to hire people somewhere else. How do we do it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think one of the great things about the remote community, and actually you're a big part of this, is how supportive and welcoming it is. If you compare it to some of the other initiatives around better work, flexibility, diversity, equality, and I would put remote work as a big driver under workplace flexibility, which is a bigger issue altogether. But the fact is that there's a lot of companies out there who are sharing how they do it. They're sharing what worked and what didn't work, and that's been so helpful for us as we've grown. Looking at companies like Buffer and Basecamp and Zapier, GitHub, and seeing how they do it, why they're doing things a certain way. It really helps along the way.
Yeah, why reinvent the wheel, right? There's a whole bunch of people experimenting out there. Like, why start without any knowledge? Like, it's good to check out what they're doing and learn. Yeah, like
Absolutely.
anything. Yeah, like anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I think the community is also very supportive because it's driven around the topics of freedom, flexibility, diversity, inclusion, and so I think there's all kinds of motivators. Like companies want to. There's a clear win-win. Companies want to save money, and people want freedom. So if you can magically make it work, it's not easy, and we're going to dive into that, then people get the best of both worlds, right? Like we all get more freedom and companies get a stronger, more connected workforce. So that seems like it could be a big win-win, but it can't be all roses all the time. So let's dive into what are some of the challenges that you guys have faced, and what are some of the things you've tried? What's hard about working with Shield GEO?
So, I mean, time zones, communication is, I think you hear that from everybody. Communication is the hardest part. And for us, some of the things we've really struggled with is how do we try and get people to assume best intentions? How do we get people to build trust and relationships when they're working asynchronously? Increasingly, I think we're starting to see culture as a bit of a filter there. That when we've got people interacting in different regions, or particularly across different cultures, it just takes a little more effort and thought to bond and build good relationships. And that's been a real sort of learning from us, because particularly when you start a company at the beginning, two founders, we'd known each other for so long, trust was high, communication not a problem, and then when we hired, a lot of it was initially co-located, so that's easy, right? From a communication standpoint, it's easy. And then as we started to add people in, the problems sort of build up a little bit, and you don't always notice. You don't notice how the communication can start to deteriorate, or maybe it's not always visible to you. And so what we've found, particularly as we've gone to sort of 15, 20, 25 people, is we've had to start pay more and more attention to that. How are we treating each other? Do we have the same level of trust and sharing across the group as it starts to grow?
How do you do that? What are some of the things that you've done for that?
there's a whole bunch of little things that we've done. So we have a lot of active social channels on Slack. So we're trying to share jokes, and we use Know Your Team, a software application which has been really helpful. It sends out questionnaires 3 times a week, gathers everybody's inputs into a little like newsletter thing, and then shares it through. And that's been really great in terms of getting to see the other side of people. I think Monday is like a question about what are you doing this week, like a work question. Wednesday's a company culture sort of question. So the question this week was about what's going out tomorrow is feedback from the retreat. And then Friday is like a fun question. So I remember like one of the most popular ones was, how do you like your eggs? And then there was this big divide in the company. Like some people were like so team egg, and then other people were like, I don't even like eggs that much. And so that was really fun to have that.
Who would have thought?
Sort of, yeah. And so there's a lot of sort of conscious, I think if there was one takeaway, it's you have to be very conscious of communication in a remote environment. You can't just expect that it's going to be great and expect that you're just going to be able to scale and everybody you add in is just automatically going to have a great relationship. You have to introduce them to everybody. You have to explain to them how it works. And then we have to keep prompting people in terms of how we think it should be and how we can sort of move towards it. Okay.
And so some of the ways you've done it so far is asynchronous communication. So using Slack channels and questionnaires. I'm assuming that like if you're trying to notice things on the team, that maybe you have also some sort of feedback mechanism in place or appreciation or retrospective. Yeah, some sort of thing that you do.
That's a good question. And we probably should, but we're not big on metrics, and particularly on tracking. So what we've done is when we've identified specific issues, so where we've like identified, oh, these 2 people aren't communicating as well as perhaps they could, then we try and deal with that. Let's work out what we can do with that, and then we're also trying to say, okay, well that's not just a once-off. That's happened because there's reasons why that's happened. There's some sort of systematic breakdown. So what can we do overall to try to address it? Mm-hmm. And so what we're trying at the moment is sort of a combination of a big bang thing. So one example is we wanted to talk about trust. And so we did a big presentation about trust and got people to do a little exercise. And then we're trying to do some subtle measures, we're triggering trust conversations in everybody's one-on-ones this month. So we're sort of like you're trying to introduce the theory, and then we're also trying little measures to push it along in practice.
Oh, I really like it. I mean, it's an interesting experiment. So how has it gone so far?
It's early days, right? So I'm always suspicious when you hear people talk about things and like, oh, this thing's amazing, but actually they've literally just started it. Right. But what I've found particularly, I don't know if it's unique to our company or if it's unique remotely, but you can't assume that if you give the message once that it's going to get through, and no one can see what's inside your head. So you have to explain everything. This is what we want to do. This is why we want to do it. This is what we thought of, and this is what we dismissed, and this is why we decided to go this particular way. So people can go on that little journey, and then you have to like engage them all. So do you agree? Do you disagree? And then even then, we still need to nudge them to change their behavior. Right. If that's what we're trying to do. Right. And so that's, I guess, what I'm talking about is we've sort of stumbled across this where we've identified little things that we can do to sort of bond people together. we put in Donut, like a pairing app in Slack. And that was great because it started to get people who hadn't communicated before to talk to each other. But
That's a great app.
Yeah, it's really good, right? But in itself, it doesn't fix the problem.
Right.
It's just one little measure that helps you move more towards that, if that makes sense.
Right. So there's no one thing that you've done that's like, that was it. We implemented Donut and everything was great. It's more that you need to get people talking to each other and paying attention to each other. And there are a number of different little things you've put into place to make those interactions happen. Like, I'm sure there's a bunch of things that you stopped doing also that you've experimented with. And yeah. And I think one thing that people really appreciate no matter what is the effort that's been put into things. When a company is actually really trying and putting effort in to making communication happen, people notice that and I think respond really well to that. So if it's a genuine effort from the company, then usually it's a genuine response from its employees, usually.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Otherwise all the effort's in vain, to be honest, which would be a little depressing. But yeah, I would like to think so. Actually, so there is one other example is, I think you and I talked about this before, but we implemented water cooler chats. And so if we think about our company, effectively we're in 3 regions, acting like a multinational, even though we're a tiny company. But we've got the Americas, we've got EMEA, like Europe, Middle East, Africa, and then we've got APAC, so Asia Pacific. And so APAC is where I'm at, and so we came up with the idea that in APAC, if you're working remotely, you have to join a daily Zoom call. I think it's at about 1:30 Sydney time. It goes for like 15 minutes, and everybody just gets on there, and it's literally what happened for you today, and then you pass the mic to the next person. And that's been great in terms of getting that team communicating. In the Americas, they do it once a week on Fridays, and they drink during it, alcohol. So different dynamic, but that's what's working for them. And then in EMEA at the moment, they don't do anything like this. And so it's been interesting watching that. That's happened over the last maybe 6 months or so. So I think that's an example of something where we've tried, I tried to roll it out everywhere, and Europe were just like, no, we're not up for it.
I love it. It's also a great example, though, of how you just let each region be its own region and be its own culture or have its own thing. I mean, it can change at any time, but like the fact that there's Friday drinking in the Americas and there's a daily stand-up in APAC, and EMEA doesn't have anything, and yet you're the same company, you have access to the same resources, that's the same culture. I think that it points out a little bit that it's nice that there is, there's a regional difference, and that's okay. And each region has its own culture. So, I mean, because a lot of times we start to think about remote teams, I think, in a way of, it's one company and we're a global company, but actually the regions are different, and this sort of highlights and celebrates that in some ways.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It really, I hadn't really thought about it that way, but yeah, because even though they're in different countries, like if you think about the Americas, for us, that's US, Mexico, Argentina.
Right, totally different cultures.
Exactly, but they, as a team, or like as a group, and even within that, they're in different work teams. They're just in the same time zone, and yet they're bonding over this sort of shared ritual.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that I always say to people. You can't control, you have to experiment. There is no way to know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And the idea is, I wish there was a silver bullet, because I would be rich, like I would have taken that silver bullet and ran with it. But there is no silver bullet. And I think that this example highlights that perfectly, which is, you have the same company, the same thing, and these 3 different cultures have sort of emerged, and they'll probably be ever changing. At some point, EMEA is going to get really jealous of the drinking parties in the Americas, and they're going to establish their own, like game night or something. You never know.
I'm surprised because actually I thought EMEA would be the drinky ones, but
It's true.
so far
Wine and
not.
cheese or something. It makes sense, but okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so, okay. So one of the things that I wanted, there's two things that I definitely want to talk about. And the first one I think that would make the most sense to go to is time zones, because you guys are working across a number of different time zones. And what's painful for you specifically? I know the world's far apart. And what are some of the some of the things you've tried to do for managing time zones?
Well, so if anyone was watching this, they would see the moment you said time zones, I started rubbing my forehead.
It's it's true. It's really hard.
Straight away, it's such a pain. So look, the fact is, it's not all bad with time zones. So you got to take the good with the bad. It's driven us more towards asynchronous work, which I personally really, really enjoy. Like, I love the fact that we don't have a busy work culture where people are pinging you all the time to interrupt your work. And so when I talk about how time zones can work to your advantage, in Australia, a lot of our clients are in Europe and the US. By the time I come online in the morning, then they're done for the day. Certainly, like East Coast Pacific time. East Coast and Central are done. Pacific time is still working. But so I wake up in the morning, I look at my inbox, and it doesn't really change. And so that's actually quite nice. You have quite a calm day. When I travel to Europe, and their stuff's coming in all the time, I find it really difficult to deal with, because it's a different working environment.
Yeah.
Now, but having said that, because of this, the biggest risk for us is if we ever have a miscommunication, if something's not clear, or if you ask 2 questions and you should have asked 3, we lose a day. Every single time we lose a day, because they're going to get your message after you've left work for the day, and you're not going to see their reply until you start again tomorrow. And so something that we always have to go back to, it's easy to fall off the wagon with this, but we always go back to trying to over communicate. Make sure that you give that extra bit of detail. If you're asking a question, think about what the follow-up questions might be. And that's not just internally, that's how we deal with our partners, how we deal with our clients as well. And that's a lesson that we've learned the hard way. And then I think the other big learning for us around time zones is everybody in the company is going to have times, particularly at the size we're at, you're going to have times when you're working totally by yourself. That means there's no one else online, no one in your team online, might not even be anyone else in the company online. And if you don't know how to do something, you're stuck.
Yeah.
Until someone comes online, or until tomorrow. And so particularly when we're training, we try to move very slowly. And the message we're always telling people is, we're not training you to get you up to speed as quickly as we can. We're training you for that moment. The moment when you're by yourself and you don't have anyone else around you, that at that moment you feel confident that you know what you're doing.
Right. Or you at least know where to look, or where to start, or how to think about a situation like that. Yeah, because there's certain mental things that you can do for yourself too, that I'm sure, if people just knew about that, like, when you're stuck in a situation, there's like mental things that you can do to prepare yourself for that. So it's also, you can always do something. So yeah, it's an interesting mindset, I think, for a lot of remote workers, because many of us work alone, and all of a sudden you get to a problem and you're like, I have no idea what to do with this. Now what do you do? So it's a pretty common scenario. Nice to have somebody in your company that can recognize that.
Yeah, well, so I think it's interesting. It's one of the things that I don't think people talk about enough, is that even within remote, there's so many different flavors. And if you think about, like, if you're a remote US only company, so you're hiring remote folks, but they're all in the US, or if you're a remote US East Coast company, then the way that you work and the dynamic that you have is probably going to be different. And that's fine, you know. Like, it means that there can be a style of work to suit every person, and you know, there's an infinite variety of people.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting for us, I think, finding the style that works for us, and then adapting that to the physical limitations, time zone being the biggest one, that we can't solve for that.
Right. Yeah. There is no great time zone answer. We cannot squeeze the world together physically more. It's a physics problem at some point. It's not a mindset problem or any other. It's not a technology problem anymore. It's simply a physics problem, and it's not solvable. So I mean, you know, it's like gravity. You know, what are you going to do? So we're nearing the end of the time, but I have so many questions, but I just have to stick to a couple more. And one is, I want to ask you about your company retreat. And I know about this because we talked about this earlier, and you took the Work Together Anywhere workshop, which is nice. So for people listening, like we've spoken numerous times. But you had said that your company, most people had not met before in person. Everybody's a remote worker. Did I get that right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you decided to have a company retreat. And so I would like to know, like, tell people, where was your retreat? Why did you decide to do it? And then, of course, you know, I'm going to ask, like, what was the difference, and was it worth it? And
okay, sure. So yeah, it's funny because when I started the workshop, I think the retreat sort of happened sort of middle of the way through.
You had we had spoken before your company went on the retreat, and I was telling you it's going to be awesome. But let's hear. So let's start from the beginning. So you decided to take your company on a retreat.
Well, look, you were right. So just to give away the
punchline. Okay.
So it was funny, actually. Everybody I spoke to beforehand, my conversation with you was really inspirational. I had a great conversation with Peldy, who runs Balsamic, and that was I think sort of January this year, and he really, at the time, I was talking to him about, you know, we've got these communication things, we're trying to align people. He was like, oh, the retreat's going to solve all this stuff. And I don't know that the retreat was like a silver bullet that solved all the problems, but it was such a fun and sort of joyous experience. Getting all these people together. I think we were there for. Well, sorry, let me set the scene. So we did it in Thailand, in Phuket. We said to people that you can come earlier or later, but we're just covering the period that everybody's there. So everyone had to fly in on the Sunday, and then people started to leave on the Thursday. Unfortunately, there were 5 people who couldn't make it, mostly because of family commitments, because we have a lot of working parents, and it's, you know, you can't leave your kids. So we had it at a resort. It was close to an airport. That was really helpful because it was very easy to get to and from. And what we tried to do was we spent the mornings doing sort of company stuff, and then the afternoons were meant to be like catching up on work, because we're a service business. We can't turn off our clients for a week. And then in the evening, we were trying to do activities together. And actually, I didn't participate in this because I was running a lot of the workshops, so I was quite drained in the afternoons. But one of the things that people enjoyed the most was actually working together, which was so weird because, like, everybody works by themselves in their homes for the most part, and yet they were all in this, like, one of the people, Elise, had a suite. And so I think at one point she had like 12 people in there. There were people like perched on the bar and all over the couch. And it was like a party. But they were
Amazing.
working. Yeah. And like I was getting these, like, people were like, oh, you got to come up here, room 414, you know, where everybody's here, we're having a great time, blah, blah, blah. And even afterwards, like, for a lot of people, that was actually the highlight.
That is super interesting. So actually people just enjoyed hanging out and working together, like in a
It's so
group, not
sad,
even
isn't it?
this. No, it's great. I think it's awesome. And it shows, I mean, there are so many managers out there who are really afraid to let people work remotely because they're afraid that people are going to be lazy. And here you are in Thailand. For many people, this is like an exotic location that they've never been to before. And the thing they enjoyed most was hanging out with their colleagues and working. So I don't know. I think it just goes to show that the mindset is actually different. The fear that a lot of people have is relatively unfounded because the mindset of most people is let's do our jobs well. Like that's
Yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's like I think in your book you talked about this, like it's a myth, and it's it's one of those things that once you realize it just doesn't make any sense before. But for most people, I think particularly for some of the people we've been lucky enough to have join us, being able to work remotely is a huge thing for them. If you're thinking about like a working parent who has to commute all the time, barely gets to see their family, they're stressed. For them to be able to spend more time with their family, to control their hours, and to have flexibility around it. You want to take time out in the middle of the day to go to the doctor. You want to go to your child's music rehearsal. You can reschedule your activities around that. Is massive. And one of the ways that they pay that back is loyalty and engagement.
Yeah.
So I think if you can get into a situation, like my big thing is flexible work, of which I view remote work as a subset. And I think if you offer people that flexibility where they can start to achieve some of the goals that they have in life, some of the things that they want to do in order to make their life more meaningful or happy or whatever, that people really, really appreciate that.
Yeah. And they will do what it takes to keep that scenario available to them. So
Yes.
yeah, so managers who are worried about your people being lazy, they will not be lazy. They will do whatever it takes to keep the freedom, whatever type of freedom it is for themselves, right? It's the freedom to commute, the freedom to train for triathlon, the freedom to, I don't know, go to your kids' music rehearsals. I can imagine that's pretty cute. So
Yeah, for sure. But actually, I mean, so this is something that we haven't always got right. So one of the things that we've really had to work on over time, and it's really been a trial and error process, is what sort of people do we need? And what sort of characteristics do they need in order to be able to be successful in that environment? And once we've started to get better at that, I think it's made a big difference in terms of, we've had quite a few people who haven't worked out, and that's happening less and less as we're getting better at it.
Okay, but I hear that from companies that hire people in person as well, that it's just really hard to hire people. I mean, it's no matter, everybody's on their best behavior in the beginning. We don't, some people are doing things because they need it, not because they want it. And I mean, there's all kinds of things that you just can't know in the very beginning. I mean, it's like dating, right? You go out with somebody like 10 times sometimes before you're like, no, it's not for me. But so it takes a while. But one of the things before we go, I'm like, we're totally over time, but I got to ask, you're saying that you've been tracking or hiring for characteristics that people need. What are some of the characteristics that people need?
Well, so we've got two things that we try and balance, and one is our company values. And so that's growth, being human, doing the right thing, and ownership. And so in the first interview, we have like a values interview where we ask the same questions to everybody, and we're listening for certain things. There's certain things we want to hear and certain warning signs that we're looking out for to see whether people are aligned on those sort of basic principles. And then there's also characteristics. So we feel that in order to work well remotely, you need to be well organized, because we don't want to micromanage. I don't think that works well in a remote environment. Certainly we don't want to do that, which means we need people who can manage themselves. They need to be able to prioritize. They need to be able to get up in the morning and know what they need to do. I've spoken to people who also believe a lot in people who structure their day. Still haven't made up my mind about that one. But one of the other characteristics we look for is empathy. So that's if we think someone comes across as not empathetic, we're not going to hire them. And written communication is probably, in fact, our first filter. So you don't even make it to the interview stage if you don't have great written communication, because in an asynchronous environment, we just can't survive without it.
Really good point to bring up is I think a lot of people during the interview process will say like, yeah, it's not so good, but maybe we can make it work. But with written communication, you're right. Remote teams are doing tons of asynchronous communication. If you can't communicate what you need to, what's going on, then it's going to make things hard for everybody. So,
yeah, and so that's true. So we're looking for people who default to, like, they're going to give you 3 sentences instead of 5 words. They're going to give you 2 paragraphs instead of 2 sentences, just because it helps to give the context. And if they find it easy to communicate that way, then they're going to find it easy to being in our environment.
Right. Super interesting. So people who are well organized and can prioritize their time well, people with empathy and great written communication skills. So, and I love that you do a values exercise to really make sure that people are aligned with the values of your company. So I'm sure there are many other hiring tips, but we've run out of time. So there's only one last question, which is, if people want to learn more about you, what is the best place to find you?
So me personally, I'm pretty active on Twitter at Planet Burgess. So Planet and my surname, Burgess, is my Twitter handle. And company shieldgeo.com. You can read about what we do there. And we publish a lot of articles on there about our team, about remote work, and increasingly people who we come across. So that can be a good way to find out what we're up to.
Great, and I will also publish those in the show notes for people, so it'll be really easy to just click in the show notes and find you and the company. Tim, thank you so much for your time today. I know it's late, like really late, and you still have other meetings tonight, so I really appreciate you getting on and telling your story and your journey. So thanks so much.
No problem. It's been an absolute pleasure.
All right, until next time, everybody, be powerful.